sure many of you have maybe been to a very nice restaurant, a fine restaurant, you order a great bottle of wine, and the sommelier or the waiter or waitress asks, would you like us to decant this bottle for you? And you know, it's great, it's fun, you get some beautiful fancy decanters that are a lot of fun. But you don't necessarily always have to decant wine. Like, when do you decant wine? How long do you decant wine? And unfortunately, the question is always answered with my typical answer that frustrates people is, well, it depends. But we'll try to break it down for you a little bit and talk about when we decant and what we decant. So on average, decanting's mainly used for red wines. Mainly because we're all about trying to soften the wine, we're trying to more rapidly mature those tannins and air them out and get some oxygen in the wine. And so on average, you're not gonna decant white. So let's talk about reds for a minute. One of the biggest kind of mistakes or misinformation people have is that an older a wine, the actual more decanting it needs. That's not true. Because what is decanting in its purest sense? It's just getting more oxygen into the bottle faster. And so if you think about it, let's talk about a 10-year-old wine, for example. Well, you actually get a little bit of oxygen through the top of the cork. And so that's called micro-oxidation. And so you're getting a little bit of oxygen over the life of that wine. And what you're doing in decanting is adding more oxygen to open the wine up, to soften the tannins, get the fruit to come out. But an older wine's already had some oxygen over the life of its aging. So if you have a 10-year-old wine, you don't need to decant it for an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours. And if you have a 15 or 20-year-old wine, you especially don't need to decant those much longer. So, there's still some decanting that needs to happen because that wine has actually been deprived of oxygen for such a long period of time that it needs that. But those older wines, you really have to pay attention to them when you're decanting. Sometimes it only takes 15 minutes. Sometimes it could take 45 minutes. It just depends on the wine. But typically, the bigger a wine, the bolder a wine, and frankly, the younger a wine is typically when you need to decant. So Cabernet Sauvignon, let's just use that as an example, very common for decanting, right? Because there's typically a lot of beautiful tannin structure, and you really want to soften that up through the decanting process. So there's also a right way and a wrong way to decant. So, there's all these fancy aerators out on the market too. Those work fine, but do you really need it to get the same effect? No, I mean, decanting works just as well, but the key is those aerators, you don't want to use those on an older wine because they can bruise the wine, get too much oxygen too fast, and that actually will make your wine not taste that great. So, the other mistake people make is when you're decanting, how you pour it into the bottle. Now, if you have a younger wine, again, it's not as important to worry about, oh, am I pouring it right? Because if you kind of pour it and it goes glug, 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 like you're getting that oxygen faster. In the younger wine, that's great. So if you've got a wine that's, let's say, 3 to 5 years from vintage, I'd consider that a younger wine, especially if it's a bigger, bolder wine, a Bordeaux varietal like a Cabernet Sauvignon, or even a bigger varietal like a Petit Syrah, for example. Those are younger in that 3 to 5 years. Pour it in, and it'll be decanting and doing great, and you can probably leave it in there for anywhere from 30 minutes to over an hour. But I always recommend, checking the wine, taking a little taste of it every, 30 minutes or so to see where it's going. And if you feel it's starting to open up, just pour it in the glass and start drinking it, because you got to remember your glasses are also a very small version of a decanter, but it'll still oxidize and get that oxygen in there. So how do we pour for an older wine? And this is where it's important, because you don't want to get your glug, glug, glug pouring going on. You want to be very gentle with the wine and pour it in as slow as you can, because you just don't want too much oxygen too fast, because it'll bruise that wine. So when you're pouring an older wine, and again, this is a good style decanter. You can find these pretty typical many places. There's lots of very fancy decanters. At the end of the day, you just need a vessel that's significantly bigger than your bottle, that has a good opening, gets oxygen. That's really all you need. This is one that I typically use very often. It's a pretty typical style and very effective. But you want to get your decanter very horizontal so that you have the ability to pour this wine in very, very slowly. And see, look at me, too much because I'm spilling on the floor. You don't want to lose any wine. But you just pour very, very slowly and see how that's just gently flowing in there. You really don't want to have a glug, glug, glug effect. So that's what you do with an older wine. But like I said, with a younger wine, you can be a little bit more aggressive with your decanting. So you can just throw it in there, let it go. And the other thing too, if you have a younger wine or if you're tasting it and after some decanting, you're not very happy with how quickly it's going, you can speed up the decanting process. So, on an older wine, we might swirl a little bit like this, just like you would in your glass. But with a younger wine, you can be a little bit more violent with it, get some bubbles in there, and just get a lot more oxygen into the wine. So, again, unfortunately, it depends how long you want to decant, what you want to decant. But if you're ever concerned about opening an older bottle or a special bottle for a special occasion and whether or not you decant it, feel free, call us anytime, ask us any questions. We're more than happy to talk to you about it, give you some tips and more specific advice for a particular wine. If you drink any other wine, take that advice as well. Call the winery, ask them. They're gonna know what's best for that particular wine that you want to enjoy, when you can enjoy it, and of course, decanting, no decanting, and if so, how long. Cheers.